How you guys all doing today? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Mardiege, joining you today on a Friday, January 3rd today. After we were back on here on Monday, we had a couple more days off for, the last bit of the holiday break before we are back to the regular schedule starting this upcoming Monday next week. So, with that in mind, this is the final weekend of the NFL regular season. We got a lot to talk about, including our usual weekly game picks, our final installment of the regular season version of that before we get into the playoff matchups next week. Also, talking about the playoffs, we're going to get into some playoff clinching scenarios that we do have in front of us coming up this week with the Bengals, the Steelers, the Ravens, the Vikings, and the Lions as well. We're going to get into all of that, what can happen, what can happen, who is where. All of that is coming up on today's show, as well as talking about some other things heading into Week 18. But before we dive into anything, I'd like to remind you guys, if you guys want to get involved with the show in any way possible, you guys got any questions, comments, or opinions you'd like to share, please don't hesitate to get involved. Your insight and really input into anything we say or cover on these live shows is always greatly appreciated and greatly received. It always adds a lot to these shows, so please don't think twice about saying whatever's on your mind during these live shows. And now, if you want to make it absolutely sure that I see your message and it stands out and, it ends up featuring on the show, there's an easy way to do that. Just by using the new Super Chat feature. Just click the $ at the bottom of the chat box that you see on your screen. And this way, it guarantees that your message gets on the air. And it's also a fantastic way to support our channel. And we rely on your support to keep bringing you the sports content you love. And again, we always appreciate it when you guys are able to get involved, but also do that for us with any question, comment, or any concern you may have. So again, let us know what you're thinking. Hit the Super Chat button, and let's keep this show as interactive and as exciting as possible. Again, please don't hesitate to get involved with the show. But with that in mind, before we dive into any playoff, related content on the NFL, the Pro Bowl rosters came out yesterday. The Pro Bowl for the AFC and the NFC obviously was announced yesterday, and I have pretty much the full rosters on here other than, the special teamers and the fullbacks. But it was pretty interesting, who got in, who missed out. And there was a couple spots where I thought that there are some players that should have made it. I got a couple spots that I think some players definitely were snubbed. But then I got other spots where I'm thinking maybe, it's definitely a topic of conversation. I'm not so strongly on it, but there are definitely some spots where I think that some players definitely missed out that I thought deserved to be on there. But going through some of the major, spots, so I'm not just listing off all the positions, right? At the quarterbacks, we got Sam Darnold, Jaden Daniels, and Jared Goff for the NFC. And the AFC quarterbacks, we got Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson, and Josh Allen. Probably the three favorites for the MVP are all in the AFC. Three quarterbacks in the AFC. No real problems there on the AFC side of things. Then we get to the running backs. Derrick Henry, Joe Mixon, and Jonathan Taylor in the AFC. And then in the NFC, we have Saquon, obviously, Jahmyr Gibbs, and Josh Jacobs. The wide receivers, there were a little bit of some head scratchers here for me. In the AFC, we had Nico Collins, Jamar Chase, obviously, with the kind of season that he had, on pace to get the Triple Crown. Zay Flowers was named to his first Pro Bowl, and Jerry Jeudy was the last one named to the AFC side of things. And then in the NFC, Justin Jefferson, of course, CeeDee Lamb, obviously, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Terry McLaurin were all the wide receivers for the NFC. And some other mentions on here, Brock Bowers made his first Pro Bowl in his first year with the kind of season that he had. Trey McBride also made it, despite, only having one touchdown. He definitely deserved to make it. It's just kind of funny how, for how good he's done and quite literally doing almost everything for that passing game. He only has 1 touchdown, which is insane this year. And then trying to think of any other positions that were head scratchers. I mean, looking at the outside linebackers, Jared Verse in the NFC, he made his first, as a rookie, which was very impressive, coming in to the Los Angeles Rams and making an impact right away. Definitely a guy that is well deserving of that spot. And similarly, in a similar position group, we have the defensive ends, and in the NFC, no real problems with it, but I just couldn't help but think how Aiden Hutchinson would probably be in there among, those three guys. The guys that were named were Micah Parsons, Nick Bosa, and Rashawn Gary. Aiden Hutchinson, just came to my mind, and the kind of season that he was having, he surely was going to be among some of the guys named to these Pro Bowl selections, right? Talking about guys making their first Pro Bowl selections, were Jalen Carter for the Philadelphia Eagles. He made his first one, being named to the interior defensive line group, and similarly, a teammate of his, Cam Jurgens, stepped in to replace Jason Kelce, and in his first season doing so, makes a Pro Bowl, which is outstanding stuff there for the Eagles. But, for the most part, talking about offensive tackles, guards, defensive backs, really, no real problems. I thought for the most part, this list was pretty accurate. The only spots that I do have some potential issues with would be quarterback, wide receiver, and the safety spots were the three biggest ones. Defensive backs, if I have enough time to get to it, I'll touch on it, but there wasn't a huge problem there. But really, starting off with the quarterbacks, it's not like I have a huge problem with it, like I'm outraged or completely surprised by it, but, some of the bigger names that were left off were Baker Mayfield with the kind of season that he was having, and obviously Patrick Mahomes for the AFC side of things. And Mahomes, obviously, with who he is, the legacy, and, what he means already for the sport, for him to not be in there, for it not to be a given for him to be in there is surprising, but it's tough to kind of make a selection that's fair, but also, everybody knows that Patrick is obviously among the best of the best. So for him to not be in there, it is a little bit tricky because Joe Burrow's having a fantastic season. Lamar, obviously, the same thing. And Josh Allen, all three of those guys. And then you throw in Patrick in there, someone's going to not have to make it. And if you want to look at the stats and the kind of numbers that Joe and Lamar and Josh have all put up are not light years ahead of Patrick, but they're just otherworldly right now. They're doing so much for their teams that, it is a bit surprising to not see Patrick in there, but I don't really hate it. I think that it's been a pretty fair selection for the AFC. It's not like they threw in some other quarterback in there, not naming any names, but those guys are very much deserving of being in there. And then on the other side, Baker Mayfield, this one's a bit closer than I think Patrick, Joe, Lamar, and Josh Allen, just because, you look at the NFC side of things, you have Sam Darnold making it for the first time, Jaden Daniels making it in his first year, and then you have Baker Mayfield, who it's not like the numbers don't really support him either. Baker is number 2 in the entire NFL in completion percentage, completing 72% of his passes. He's tied for second in the entire NFL in touchdowns thrown with 39, only behind Joe Burrow. And he's number 3 in total yards thrown as well. And for him to not make the cut seems a little bit more unfair. But again, Sam has had an unbelievable resurgence to lead the Vikings to where they are right now. You're almost not going to leave him off, right, for where the Vikings are at this point in time. Everybody has fallen in love with Jaden Daniels, deeming him the next big thing, and it's rightly so. It's not like he's undeserving either. He's had an amazing season. He was probably going to win Offensive Rookie of the Year, and also, you look at Jared Goff, the other quarterback. Same thing, similar to Sam Darnold, but Jared Goff also showed it a little bit last year, and then this year he was on a very impressive, run there of completions and touchdowns to incompletion, something crazy. So, yeah, it was tough to include Baker in there as well, but for the most part, it's not like I have a huge problem with it, but it is a topic of conversation certainly there with the quarterbacks. And then the one I would say I have the most problems with, I guess you could say, would be the wide receivers, mainly around these two. I mean, Jerry Judy's had a pretty decent season, considering everything for the Browns and everything like that. He's been a bright spot for them, for sure. But also, in this group for both wide receivers, and it's not just these two, but this was the main problem or the main topic I wanted to talk about, because you could include guys like A.J. Brown in here that didn't make it. Jackson Smith and Jigba also had a nice year, maybe to be thrown in there over Terry McLaurin or something like that for some people that maybe aren't too happy with that selection. I mean, in terms of numbers, just real quick, for Jackson Smith and Jigba and A.J. Brown to maybe make it over Terry McLaurin, you know, Terry's second in touchdowns, so that's obviously a big thing. He's got 12 receiving touchdowns this year, but Jackson Smith and Jigba and A.J. Brown surpass him in receiving yards, and also Jackson Smith and Jigba has more receptions than Terry McLaurin as well. But, in terms of value, if you take Jackson Smith and Jigba away from the Seahawks, and if you take away A.J. Brown from the Eagles, huge losses. But I think if you take away Terry away from the Commanders, it's a bigger impact than taking those guys away, because you still have Devontae Smith and DK Metcalf and all those guys, and Saquon, for crying out loud. So I understand it, but those guys also were definitely deserving of being included in there as well. But going back to these two, I mean, it's tough because you look at the numbers and they're very similar. They're almost exactly the same in yards, receptions. The touchdowns obviously favor Brian Thomas a lot more. But I don't know. I feel like I can't make a legit argument for Jerry Jeudy to make it over Brian Thomas Jr. Brian Thomas Jr. has been sensational for the Jaguars, and I feel like sometimes rookies get hard done by it. A lot of rookies have had a lot of love in these selections, but for Brian Thomas not to make it, you could think that, oh, he plays for the Jaguars, they've not had a great record. Neither have the Browns. The Browns have been just as bad. So I don't know. I feel like this one was very puzzling to me, because these two are the closest ones in the AFC. I wasn't really thinking of anybody else to include in this discussion, but really Brian Thomas, to me, is arguably, other than Trevor and maybe Josh Hines Allen, probably the most valuable player to this team. I mean, Travis Etienne didn't really have a great year, and I can't think of anybody else that really brought as much value and excitement and explosiveness, that X factor ability, other than Brian Thomas Jr. And then you look at Jerry Jeudy. I mean, he did have that massive game against his former team in the Broncos, but I think of guys like Myles Garrett, Denzel Ward, Nick Chubb, a little bit, and even the quarterback ahead of maybe a guy like Jerry Jeudy. Again, not that Jerry Jeudy had an awful season, but I think that this one was one I probably would have leaned more towards the rookie, maybe instead of other positions where Jared Verse made it, or these other, like Jaden Daniels or something like that. I thought Brian Thomas deservedly should have been in there, but that's a different discussion, obviously, depending on how you view each team in each situation. But I'd like Brian Thomas to have made it in that spot. And the last thing I wanted to say was the safety position. I don't know how Kirby Joseph didn't make it. The safeties that were selected in the NFC were free safety and strong safety were Buda Baker and Brian Branch, and Xavier McKinney in the NFC. I mean, if Brian Branch is playing strong safety, I get it that you have to include Kirby Joseph as the free safety, right? You're not going to make them, because that's not technically his position, if you want to go that route. But Xavier McKinney, huge addition. I loved Xavier McKinney going to the Packers, but Kirby Joseph leads. He almost has double-digit interceptions, and the kind of impact that he makes, I don't think it's a coincidence that almost every starter on the Lions defense got hurt except him, and they're still, keeping their head above water, right? Not to diminish anything Aiden Hutchinson, Malcolm Rodriguez, Barnes, or Alexander Zaloni do for that team, but you look at some of the moments and plays that he's made last week against the 49ers. The 49ers probably would have kept scoring if it wasn't for that interception. Again, the game against the Green Bay Packers, pick six completely changes the dynamic of that game when Brian Branch left in that game. So I thought that one was just a crazy one for Kirby Joseph not to make it. The kind of impact that he has, in terms of turnovers and things like that, was a bit head-scratching for me. But again, for the most part, I thought it was all right, but I would have liked to have seen a little bit more of those changes that I kind of laid out there in this first segment. But we'll see if anything changes with availability and things like that closer to the Pro Bowl. But I did mention Kirby Joseph, and we're going to go and talk about the Detroit Lions a little bit more in the next segment. I'm super excited for this upcoming game against the Lions and the Minnesota Vikings. So we're going to preview that game, talk about it. Could arguably be the best game in terms of stakes, talent, everything this game has included in recent memory. So we're going to talk about it, break it down when we return.